Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Brittany Higginbotham. I'm with the Institute for Public Relations as the Communications and Outreach Manager. Thank you all for being here today. Thank you to our speakers for being here as well this afternoon. And I'm going to go through a few housekeeping notes and introduce briefly our webinar and panelists before we begin. First, this webinar is being recorded. It will be available for playback on our website and YouTube channel. It'll also be emailed out to all registrants within 48 hours of the event. Um, we just wanted to take a moment to say we are thinking of our friends and family and colleagues in Florida right now and Western North Carolina, and just keeping them in our thoughts and prayers. So, with that, I would like to transition into introducing our webinar and panelists, navigating change recommendations for advancing PR education based on a report from the Commission on Public Relations Education. And I know our speakers will go into a little bit of how that was started and all the findings that we have delved into since then. So first, we would like to introduce Dr. Amiso George, professor at Texas Christian University. And then we also have Kim Sample here with us. She's the president of the PR Council. And last but certainly not least, we have Dr. Charles Lubbers, professor of the university at the University of South Dakota. And with that, please feel free to leave any comments, questions in the chat throughout the webinar. We'll certainly link any resources that are discussed, including more information on the report. And we will have a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So feel free to, again, utilize the Q&A feature or submit your questions in the chat. And we'll make sure to get to all of those later on in the webinar. And with that, I will hand it over to Chuck to get us started.
Okay, thank you. First, I want to thank everybody for joining us who's here at the current time. You're obviously giving up in your Prime Day deals, and I appreciate that, and focusing on your profession. I wanted to start with a few comments about what the CPRE's function is, its relationship to other organizations, a little bit about the history, and then how we moved into the creation of the navigation report, some of the methodology behind it. If you're not familiar, the Commission on Public Relations Education is a consortium, has representatives from 24 different practitioner or educator groups dealing in the public relations field. Each of those groups can have up to 2 representatives, and then there are some at-large members as well. So the board is generally around 50 to 60 people with the representatives from all of the different groups. The function of this is to be the connection between the public relations industry and the public relations education. The commission celebrated in 2023 the 50th anniversary of the organization throughout that year. And in those 50 years, about every 5 to 7 years, the commission has organized a new research project to sort of update the standards in public relations education based on what educators are telling them and what practitioners are telling them. And as you look at those reports over the years, you can see how the field has changed from basically starting as an in-house journalist, media relations, to the current approaches to public relations, which are much broader. With these associations today, the Commission on Public Relations Education started in 2022, looking at the creation of the next report, the report that we'll be talking about today, Navigating Change. In the spring of 2022, they had 4 brainstorming sessions of the people who were on the CPRE board and the research committee members, and just look for what might be some of the topics that we would want to address in this news report. So what's changed and what do we need to look at? In the summer of 2022, they did 2 crowdsourcing surveys with CPRE and PR Council, looking at those topics, and they formed 7 research teams based on the primary topics that were identified through this particular process. In September of 22, then the topics were refined and honed, working with the Page Society and focus groups. And then in fall of 22, member teams, the teams that took care of each of the chapters in the final report, were formed, and those teams developed questions then that went into a quantitative survey questionnaire that was distributed to practitioners and educators through all of the different organizations that are members of the CPRE. And that was in fall of 22. Then in January and February of 23, they actually distributed those instruments to all of the different groups. March through June, then, the primary, secondary research was done by the different teams on their particular topics. And the teams reported by the beginning of June, end of May, their report for their particular chapter. And then those were worked on over the summer to finalize those that went into the report that was formally introduced in November of last year, November of 23. So it's been out not quite a year yet, about 11 months. The survey participation, which the quantitative measure that we're reporting some of the results for today, there were 269 practitioners who took it who had an average of 22.6 years of experience in the field. And there were just under 200 educators who took it and had a 21.5 years experience average. So this was a group of individuals who clearly had spent some time in the field. And what I'd like to do is to quickly talk about the different elements. These are the topics that we're going to address today. I'm going to summarize the future workplace chapter. This chapter was interesting because we did not base most of the chapter on the quantitative measure. We based a lot of it on trade literature in the field, what was actually happening at that time on some of the most pressing issues in the public relations field. And Amiso and Kim are going to be talking about some of those issues. Okay. So this was the composition of the team that worked on this particular chapter. I served as chair, and you notice Amiso George and Kim Sample were also on there and wrote some major sections of that chapter. It's one of the reasons we're so thankful that they're here today to help talk to us about some of these topics. So I wanted to begin by talking a little bit about Generation Z, which is the group that we're talking about, traditionally aged college students. That group falls in the Generation Z category and has now for a number of years. And that group has been problematic, according to some of the practitioners in the field, and a lot of educators agree that they're very different. They're different than the previous generations, even the millennials who were right before them. So one of the things is employers really have to address the priorities of this particular group when they're looking at hiring and creating a workplace that's going to let them be successful and also to retain these individuals in the future. One of the things that differentiates Gen Z from some of the other generations is they are more likely, a larger percentage of them are more likely to agree that they will give up salary for some of the other things that they establish as priorities. And while other groups say, yes, it would be nice if we, for example, took care of the environment, Generation Z seems to be more inclined to follow that with their wallet and accept less pay to work for an organization that they believe is following with their priorities. So Amiso is going to talk more about these later, but I just wanted to introduce these two categories. Their Generation Z, and looking at some of the literature in the field and what people are writing and research that has been done, we found basically there were about 10 or 11 priorities for this particular group that differentiated them from previous age cohorts. 4 of the priorities focus on the organization's commitment to society in general, and 6 of them focus on how the organization is committed to the employee. And she will address those in more detail in a little while. I'm going to focus instead on some of the results that we found from the quantitative measure that was taken by the practitioners and the educators. You can see some of the questions divided into groups. Questions for the educators first. The future for the public relations workplace. These were the mean scores across all the educators when we asked these different questions. I see generational differences in post-COVID-19 in students' attitudes regarding the work-life balance. A score of 5 was a perfect agreement level score on this. So a 4.09 is very strong agreement that we're seeing a greater focus on work-life balance and a changing focus on work-life balance. Post-pandemic student engagement is challenging, again, very strong. So the effects of the pandemic have changed the students that we're dealing with and the way they deal with society and the job hunt and workplace. There's been a shift in students prioritizing their value of contribution time spent In other words, they're less inclined to agree to the idea that the amount of time you spend doing something is a legitimate measure of its contribution, and instead focus more on the quality of the work and less on the time or the quantity. They expected, when we asked educators, do you expect the way that we teach the classroom, the pedagogy that we use, to return to the pre-COVID state? And there was pretty much universal agreement that no, we don't expect that to happen. Then we asked the practitioners some of the same questions, but a few different ones. We asked them if there's generational differences in employee attitudes and work-life balance, and they also saw that. Not only did they see it high, but they saw it higher than the educators did as well. Very strong. Again, 5 being a perfect agreement. Remote workplace practices and policies, again, very strong. They're seeing changes in this amongst the new employees, a much greater focus. In a remote working environment, organizations should offer policies relating to staff availability. Again, the same. There's been a shift in employees prioritizing their value. All of these things are above a 4. Very strong levels of agreement. And all of these things are showing how the priorities of this particular generation are impacting the workplace and the priorities that they have in a workplace setting. Some of the ones where there was lower levels of agreement, the interesting one that I saw was the one at the bottom on workplace culture. And the question is, will the workplace culture return to the pre-COVID conditions? And just like the educators, the practitioners said, no way. We've crossed that bridge. We're not going backwards. Some of the others, employers' guarantees about work-life balance will become hiring conditions for employees. That surprisingly was a little bit lower than some of the others, which I thought was interesting because they recognized that employees were interested in this, that they didn't also say, well, this will become a hiring condition. So the rest of the chapter focused on a variety of topics. I'm not going to take the time to explain all of these topics, and some of them will come up in the next section. In the next two speakers, we'll talk about some of the elements of this. But these were some of the major topics that we addressed in Chapter 2 on the future of the workplace. One of them was the work-life balance in the hybrid environments. We saw a lot of literature on that, and I think you could see from both the educators and practitioners, when we asked them that question, they see that as a major change that's going on. Interestingly enough, we didn't ask any questions about mental health and accommodations, but it has turned out to be critically important in the research that we did back in 22 and in 23, moving into 23. But it has become even more important since then. You're seeing more and more research on mental health and accommodations, dealing with individuals who have concerns in that area and using it as a hiring condition for the workplace. The DEIB commitment, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, has been important for years in our field, thankfully, and is becoming more important and a higher priority for all of the employees. And so organizations, the interesting thing is organizations are not only saying, as potential employee, I don't want to know, do you care about this? I want you to prove to me that you're doing something in it. And that is really the difference we've seen in Gen Z, is that they not only want to know that you have a concern, that you have a plan, that you have an action, they want to see proof that you have succeeded in this particular issue. There was a large section in there on artificial intelligence, and I think that Kim can speak to that quite a bit. There was also a major section on networking and experiential learning. And in fact, that turned out to be one of the major recommendations from this chapter, is that both educators need to work with practitioners to develop more networking and more experiential learning opportunities. The reason for that is practitioners are reporting that students are coming out into the workplace and they're not really prepared to be in a workplace environment. They don't understand politics and protocols of being in a workplace. And so the goal here would be to create more exposure to the profession while they're still in school, so that the transition in the workplace will be easier, we hope. And then the final topic that was covered was Gen Z's expectations of their employers. What did they expect from them? And these are some of the major topics that deal with priorities of Gen Z. So these were the recommendations that we had for in the report for both the education field that came from in collaboration with practitioners. And one of them was to develop those experiential learning opportunities for students. We need to expose them to professional behavior before they actually enter the workplace. Everybody talks about internships, but it was noted that internships are insufficient. They needed more exposure to this. They needed exposure in other classes, for example, to guest speakers, to shadowing activities, to anything that would put them in, demonstrate to them what professional behavior is like. We need to include specific course content on the ethical challenges that are involved in contemporary practice. So rather than just talking about ethical codes and ethical principles, we need to actually have content that talks about some of the major challenge points. We need to prepare students to understand their values and priorities. One of the things we talked about is how Gen Z differs in their priorities with some of the other cohort groups. And if they're going to have a successful job search and develop a successful career, they need to understand what their priorities and ethics are. Develop course content with a strong focus on students communicating on a personal level with key audiences. And this comes with the report that often students are less prepared in the current generation to take full advantage of networking opportunities, to have stronger interpersonal skills. And because of that, we maybe need to work on that to strengthen it before they enter the work environment. And then finally, a recommendation for employers is they adapt their onboarding practices for these new people, new interns, new employees. Onboarding practices of the past may not be as effective with people who have a different priority system than previous employees you've hired. Those are the basic elements that I had that I wanted to talk about related to chapter 2. And I think at this point then, we'll be moving on to Amiso's presentation and we'll deal with questions later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chuck. And welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for joining us on this webinar. What I would talk about is research that we did after the chapter came out. So Chuck, myself, and Debbie Davids of Texas Tech University, and two of our graduate students conducted research to identify what Gen Z wants and what entry-level PR jobs state. And thus, research was published just this year in the Journal of Public Relations Education, and that's available. You can check it out. So what is the research on entry-level jobs? Now, in the past, previous research has often focused on what employers want. They're looking for certain skills or entry-level PR jobs versus what we educators are teaching. So what we decided to do was do something quite different, because we wanted to know what exactly do Gen Zs want from the workplace as opposed to what employers want. So what do they want? And what do the entry-level PR jobs state? So that was the focus of our research. Now, to quote Andrew Hunter, who's a co-founder of global search engine at Zuna, he said it's imperative that companies understand the unique needs of this group and build cultures that cater to them. And Chuck just mentioned that just a short while ago. We can't go back to the past. A lot of things have changed, and we have to learn to adapt to this new changes with this particular generation that we're dealing with. So what we found out in our research is that salary is less important to Gen Zs. Their priorities are quite different. And as Chuck mentioned earlier, there are about 10 or 11 major priorities that we're able to identify through our research. 4 of the priorities deal with the organization's commitment to society behavior and commitment to socially responsible actions. And 6 of the priorities deal with organizations' commitment to Gen Z, the employees, Gen Zs as employees. So let's take a look at what Gen Zs expect from their organizations as far as commitment to society is concerned. Number one, they expect that the organization would operate in an ethical manner. Openness is important to them. So ethical behavior, ethical and responsible behavior on the part of the organization is absolutely essential. And they also expect that the organization's leadership is transparent. They also expect that the organization is committed to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, in spite of all of the negative stories that have been coming out, specifically from our politicians regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion. Gen Zs from this research have identified to us that that is very important to them. And that also the organization is committed to the environment and sustainability. They're also interested in ensuring that the organization is committed to them as employees. Specifically, they're interested in organizations that create or provides opportunities for continued education, continued training and learning for them. They're interested in organizations that create and offers opportunities for advancement. And oftentimes they would ask those questions during the interview process. They're interested in organizations that provide current and modern technology. I mean, that's one should expect. They're interested in organizations that care about work-life balance, their well-being. Again, as Chuck mentioned earlier, COVID has changed just so many things that we really cannot go back to doing things the same way as in the past. And so Gen Z have pretty much come to expect that sort of commitment from their employer. They also expect their employer to offer flexibility in work location, whether remote and or hybrid. And in fact, my colleagues and I who took a once in a lifetime work trip to New York City, we saw that for ourselves. We visited about 5 agencies, and most of the offices were about half empty or 1/3 empty. And we wondered why. And we were told that some of the employees were working wherever location they were. So organizations are paying attention to that because this is what this generation really would like, that flexibility in work location. And they also expect that the organization will provide meaningful work, meaning that their work would have some sort of impact and not just going in every day and doing routine work. They want to understand purpose, want to make sure that their work has a sense of purpose. So how did we do this? What was our method? We looked at ads from 48 companies, and 45 of those companies were non-profits. We did a content analysis, and 24 of those ads required none or some experience. 11 required at least 5 years of experience, 18 required at least 3 years of experience, and 21 required 3 to 5 years of experience. And these ads were all entry level, and we wanted to ascertain if they effectively communicated the organization's priorities, values, and culture in a way that would Gen Z applicants. But what did the ads do for entry level priorities? What did they show? What did those ads show? We found that 44 of those ads that we reviewed prioritized doing meaningful, impactful work, one that provides a sense of purpose for the Gen Z applicants. 41 of those ads showed a commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. 39 provided current and modern technology. 35 flexibility in communication, and I mentioned earlier that we actually saw that in practice when we walked to you. So the importance of providing that remote or hybrid job location is absolutely essential. We saw that 33 of these arts, and 31 of the arts showed that they operate organizations. Now, what do the ads for more of what the ads also showed us was that organizations leadership is transparent, but that was just, we only saw that in 30 of the ads, and 22 of the ads showed that organization cares for work-life balance of the employees, and 18 of those ads offered opportunities for training and learning, and 15 offered opportunities for advancement, and 7 of the ads related to the environment and sustainability. So what are the lessons about what Gen Zs expect when organizations come across? So to society, ethics, transparent leadership, commitment to DEIB, not just talking about it, but showing that commitment in tangible ways, and dedication to environmental sustainability. And to them, the Gen Z employees, very important to them, opportunities for career growth, a clear path for advancement, access to modern technology, their personal well-being, flexibility in work options, and meaningful and impactful work. So the results basically suggest that the organization's job advertisements do not necessarily align with the priorities and expectations of Gen Z candidates. In essence, organizations must address those priorities when hiring, and they have to create a workplace culture that strives to retain employees. Now, I want to add that what we did was a content analysis of job ads. It would be a great idea if future studies would explore the actual experiences or perceptions of Gen Z individuals who are applying for or occupying entry-level positions. Then that way we could take their information about their real experiences and analyze that and compare that to what the ads told them and what they're actually getting from their experience being in whatever company they choose to. So that essentially is a summary of that study that we did that was published in June of this year, and we would encourage you to check it out if you're interested. Thank you.
Sorry, just making sure I can pin Kim.
Hey, everybody. I'm so happy to be with these presenters and all of you because our agencies are fueled with young talent. So the students you're educating are critically important to us. So thank you for that. And we're always happy to be a resource, and we really appreciate the opportunity to work with the CPRE. So this is just a snapshot of some of the things that have changed in the more than a year since the research Chuck in particular presented occurred, and just some top line things for everyone to be aware of. The hybrid workplaces are very much here to stay, we believe. Within our agencies, and the PR Council represents about 150 agencies across the US and Canada, agencies of all sizes. Our agencies and also our clients, for the most part, are required to be in the office 2 to 3 days per week. That seems to be working quite well. I suspect that the 3 days is a little bit better, particularly for our newer talent. And we may see a little bit more movement to more 3 day a week, but I think those Mondays and Fridays working from home are safeguarded for most of the industry. And I think the reason that there has been a move to getting people back in the office is pretty obvious. Much better learning. There's an efficiency in the delegation, review, and communication around the work. Most of our CEOs do believe that it improves creativity to have people working face to face. So for all of those reasons, we do think this hybrid is here to stay. We do note that there continue to be some challenges in the work from home environment. We've come a long way since the early days of the pandemic, but our leaders are still noting that there is less effective delegation going on, which includes sort of performance feedback, just because it takes more time if you've got to set up a Zoom meeting and convey this information. Sometimes it's getting lost just in the pressure of these communications jobs. And I think just team connectivity, people knowing their colleagues, feeling very much a part of that team is continuing to be an issue. I'm sure there are lots of questions folks will ask about the promise of AI. Interestingly, I did a sort of similar research project to the one that Amiso mentioned. And in my project, I looked at the entry-level job descriptions across our agencies. And what I found is that AI is able to do about 30 to 50% of the tasks that were included in those job descriptions. My research is much less scientific than Miso and Charles's. But I think that's a really interesting thing. And our thinking about it across the agency environment is that this is really going to change the entry-level jobs, not do away with them, though there's likely to be some impact. We still need entry-level talent, and we still need to be developing talent across the communications field. But I think what's particularly excited is the opportunity to have some of the very mundane tasks that our entry-level talent is asked to do. We can see some of that go away. We definitely heard from our digital leaders across all of our agencies that they and the talent in their agencies felt that this was the summer of their AI disillusionment, that it hadn't quite fulfilled the promise that they expected earlier in the year. But there is a renewed focus on really digging in and figuring out how to operationalize, how to get rid of some of these mundane tasks so we can deliver more value sort of top to bottom on the team. So we're doing a lot of very specific digging in on how our agencies are using AI technologies and learning from each other and really accelerating the adoption. And I think one of the most important things that we can all work together to stress to young talent is there is a responsibility to experiment and learn generative AI and lots of new technologies. And this learning oftentimes has to take place in their own time because the business day tends to be very intense and overscheduled, to be honest. So I think that those young people who have a strong curiosity and really want to learn and advance their careers will be rewarded and recognized for doing that. One other thing I would say is that we've done a lot to promote ethical use of generative AI. We created guidelines that we made available across the industry and actually other industries as well, and have done a lot of work on setting employee policies across our agencies, and they vary a bit. And client policies strongly vary client to client, industry to industry. But that's all being more clearly communicated to talent so they know the guardrails. There's not that anxiety of, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to use generative AI to do this work. Maybe there is a little bit around the edges, but I think increasingly it's being made clearer and clearer. So our young talent knows how they can tap generative AI and what uses aren't recommended at this point. So with the AI coming in, that's not really where we're seeing issues with the number of entry-level jobs that we have and even internships. No surprise, we have seen 2 years of slow growth across our agencies. We are seeing more activity currently, so we're optimistic that we're going to see stronger growth year in 25. But it's worth being aware that our agencies are moving away from that traditional pyramid structure where we have a lot of junior people and fewer senior people. And no surprise to anyone on this call, there are a couple of factors at play. There's this whole delegation issue, and senior talent have realized there are a lot of tasks that they can just complete faster than scheduling the Zoom, delegating over Zoom, scheduling the Zoom to review. So there's that efficiency that's come into play. But also we are seeing our clients really demanding more senior talent. They're in a state of permacrisis. There are so many issues that they're dealing with. They're one after the other, and they want really experienced, knowledgeable hands on their business, and they have less tolerance for training junior talent. So I am hoping as a result, we're going to see more focus on onboarding our more junior talent and helping them learn and develop through lots of different educational offerings. But we are going to continue to see some responsibility put on the employees at all levels to develop their own skills and expertise. So what's in it for young talent? I mean, of course, we continue to believe that agencies and also corporate comms opportunities are terrific learning opportunities for young talent. We want your best and brightest. Our salary growth, we've just completed our salary study for this year and had a peek at the results. The salary growth has returned to more normal levels. I think it's important for our young people to understand, while you may start at a more modest salary, there are numerous opportunities to advance and improve your salary. Across our agencies, benefits have really improved, and I think this is important for young people who may not quite appreciate it right away. They certainly do appreciate the paid time off, better health insurance coverage. We're seeing a lot of organizations covering more of that premium. Sabbaticals offered with less tenure. We're also seeing a lot of learning and development offered to our people. The key is for folks to prioritize it, and that's both for the talent and their managers. And one important thing worth noting is we are seeing much more support and accommodation for neurodiverse talent. In the CPRE study, we noted a lot of accommodation being made for mental health issues, and I think that's going to continue. But I'm really pleased to see the accommodation for neurodiverse talent, and we are definitely seeing that population, diverse as it is, increase across our agencies. I mentioned the L&D opportunities. There's lots of those. The individual does have to make that happen and take the initiative to fit that into their schedule. When we survey young people and even people who have a few years of experience, they're super interested in working in public relations, learning more about the careers offered, and we do need to attract even beyond those students who are majoring in public relations. We need a lot of other degrees in the field, law, data and analytics. All of these are so critical to the way that communications is evolving. But what we find is that talent want to be a part of a creative team. And I think the creativity across our comms teams is only getting stronger and delivering stronger and stronger business results. We are surprised that that is not something we're seeing highlighted in a lot of job descriptions, but I think we will see that more and more because it is a lure for the industry. And I think it's exciting for folks to think about being able to do more strategic, thoughtful tasks rather than a lot of the tedious that have been required in the past. I mean, I spent the early days of my career standing at a copy machine, copying clips. And wow, have things changed since then. And I think it's only going to get better and better. And on diversity, I think given the slower growth of the industry, I think leaders across the industry are disappointed with our ability to diversify. But that does continue to be a business priority. And we do know that it's an expectation of the younger generation. And we are particularly troubled by all of the disinformation out there right now. The vocal few who are gaining a lot of headlines, and we have an initiative to take action to share the facts. And I think that'll be exciting for young people to see the entire industry standing up and really asserting the business value of DEI. And that is my very short summary. And I know my panelists and I are all eager to hear any questions that you might have.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I have a question, an anonymous question from the Q&A, and it's about the collaboration between educators and practitioners. Could either of you, all of you, speak on the report calls for closer collaboration between educators and practitioners? What are some practical ways this collaboration could be enhanced to better align academic programs with industry needs?
I'll jump in and get started. I mentioned a few of them earlier. The internships is sort of the long-term experiential learning that's been used in our field forever. What we're seeing is career development needs to go far beyond internships. It needs to start in lower level classes. It needs to start in classes where we don't traditionally talk about internships. We usually save those until they're much later in their program. And so we're talking about guest speakers, having real projects done for clients and having clients being in the classroom, providing feedback, discussing with them about the criteria and the objectives for the project and so forth. Shadowing activities where they can follow professionals in the workplace setting, because they learn not only about that particular career, but they learn about how to just be in the workplace. And that's not something that's easy for them to pick up unless they spend a little time there. So all of these kinds of activities, some of them are very small, having mixers with a local PRSA chapter, just simple things. And I remember one educator talking about how much the mixer impressed their students, because the professionals were talking to them as if they were colleagues. And that really impressed the students that they would do that. And some internship offers, mentorship offers, mentoring offers came from that mixer that they had. Those are just a few of the ideas.
Miso mentioned the New York trip that TCU did, and I think I can speak for the agencies. Like, we're so delighted to host educators and talk about issues and opportunities with students and in our businesses. And just so happy to do that in person or virtually.
I should add, it was an amazing experience. I mean, it's one thing to talk about it. It was something else to be in New York and be at all of those agencies and talk to employees, talk to the founders, the CEOs, and what we brought back continues to help us. And if I may just add to what Chuck said earlier about working together, across professions, particularly with our local PRSA, which is something that some schools already do. I brag a little bit about TCU. We do that. And all of those suggestions are so very important because for a lot of those kids, they're not used to, they may be in a classroom setting, but they're not used to being around people like Kim and being comfortable around people like them. But when people like him come around and talk to them, that makes such a huge difference because you don't learn everything in the classroom and you're going to go work for people like him. They're the ones who are going to be doing the hiring. So when they say, this is what we're looking for, we want these kids to take initiative, to feel comfortable, to being professional is basically knowing to show up on time, asking questions, being involved. So this collaboration between the academy, professionals, as well as scholars is absolutely essential to continue propelling us forward.
Thank you so much. We have another one. With all of the focus on AI, has there been any look at other emerging technologies such as VR, AR, et cetera, and their potential to PR?
I can jump in on that. I mean, I think that many of our agencies are exploring all technology available to them to help them communicate on behalf of their clients. AI is definitely dominating headlines and share of mind and share of attention. But I think there's a strong appreciation for how technology can and will continue to change our ability to effectively communicate.
Okay, thank you. Okay, then we have one second. Choose. Given the evolving demands of the industry, what are some specific curriculum changes or recommendations for educators to ensure students are well prepared for these heightened professional expectations?
Well, I think you saw the recommendations that we had. I put them up during the presentation. The focus is going to be on that professional, helping them to attain a professional attitude or an understanding of the professional workplace. And so you'll notice that of the 5, I think, recommendations that we had, more than one of them focused on that idea of how do we get them greater exposure to the work environment. And then a couple of the others focused on not only ethical challenges of the work, but understanding their own ethical framework and what they prioritize in their life. Because if they're going to be using these priorities for a job search and career development, they need to understand what their priorities are. And so I think that's going to be a little bit different. We're going to spend less time doing skill development in the sense of how do you push this button to make this happen on the computer? And we'll be spending more time trying to create a work-ready employee who understands the job setting and can figure out for themselves which button to push at some point in the future, because everything's going to change. So what we need to do is prepare them to be ready for the change.
And I would just add to that just helping young people understand the qualities that are so important and will always be important. You don't have to have lots of fancy internships, but think about how you can show your grit and your curiosity to a job prospect. And that grit is just so important because that's really critical to succeeding across the communications industry. And that's available to everybody, right?
And we talk about that with our students. You go to an event, you meet a professional such as Kim, come back, send an email. you'll be at the top of her mind. Send an email, at Christmas time or whatever holidays they celebrate, send a short message. And when you're looking for something, they say, oh, yeah, that's that young person that I got an email from. And the professionals, the CEOs and the employees, they told us the same thing in New York. They said, you can't just come out from anywhere and say, well, I have 4.0 GPA, I have all of those internships. But are you the kind of person who can take initiative? Are you the kind of person, what Kim alluded to earlier, can you do certain things, learn certain things on your own and not wait to say, well, if I'm not being paid for this however many minutes, why should I do it? Take initiative and show that grit. It really does make a difference. We've heard that. We've seen that in practice. So, yeah.
I used to have an employer in the Kansas City market who ran an agency there, come and speak to my classes when I was at Kansas State University for many years. And he had one of the greatest perspectives. He said, I don't even care what your GPA was. I assume that if you came out with a degree, you have the basic skills that we need. And, beyond that, we will train you, and we will train you in our method. He said, and this has been proven true, when I get a reference call, nobody ever asks me what grade somebody got in a class. I get questions like, do they play well in the sandbox, right? Do they get along? Can they handle group work? Do they take criticism well? Do they get the best out of their teammates? Can they work with individuals and push forward the best product? Those are the questions we get. And those are the soft issues, right? Those soft skills. And I think we're seeing in the recommendations and a lot of the things that we're seeing coming from both educators and practitioners is that we need to pay a little more attention to some of those soft skills, and we need to prepare people to deal with those in addition to the work skills and the technical skills.
Okay, thank you. And we have one specifically for Kim. Can you tell us more about the PR Council's initiative to address DEI disinformation?
Sure. This is a little bit of a preview because we're just starting to communicate this, but we have worked with all of the associations, including CPRE, across the industry, and we are planning a social media week of action October 21 through 25th, where we get as many people as we possibly can to assert the positive business benefits of DEI. We've done a lot of thinking because we have a number of DEI leaders across our agencies, so many leaders committed to DEI, and we've done a lot of hand wringing as we've watched this dis and misinformation about DEI carry the headlines. And as PR practitioners, and we're not in the habit of going out and always correcting journalists, especially on a broad topic. On client business, yes, but on a broad topic like this, it's a little more challenging. So we really worked hard to figure out what might be an effective way that we can counter this information. And I'm hoping that we do reach a lot of people and help them see the business benefits, but I think it's also a really great moment for the talent in our industry and the talent who wants to come in our industry to see that we truly do care and we are committed to diversifying the industry.
Okay, thank you. Unless I don't see any additional questions. So if that's the case, let me spotlight myself. If that's the case, we can begin to wrap it up, but I wanted to thank our speakers again for joining us, and then for all of you for attending. This, again, will be shared with all of our registrants within 48 hours via email and on our website and YouTube channel. So definitely check it out or share with a colleague that couldn't make it live today. And with that, I hope everyone has a great rest of their afternoon. Thank you all.
Thank you, IPR.
Thank you, Brittany.